Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings a tune without words and never stops at all. And sweetest is a gale is heard, and storm must be in the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I have heard it in the chillest lands and in the strangest sea, yet never in extremity did it ask a crumb of me. That was a poem by Emily E. Dickinson, and she lived from 1830 up until 1886 in Amherst, Massachusetts. I was first introduced to her poems and her works and all of that in high school, and then recently I got back into her, learned more about her life, and I ended up buying like a whole mini collection of her works and stuff about her life, and she's this amazingly interesting person. And like her poems are super prolific in writing and they're amazing. Anyways, over the next 5 to 6 minutes, I really hope to inform you a lot about Emily Dickinson's life, about her early letters to her friends that she wrote, about her reclusive late life, and finally, about how her poems were revealed to the world. So starting off, Emily Dickinson's writings were letters to friends and family, and I have this whole collection of them by Mabel Loomis Todd. And the first one that's mentioned in there is all these letters to her friend Miss Strong, who had moved away to another city and they weren't able to like intermingle or anything in person, so they wrote letters back and forth to each other, and these letters were written from 1845 up until 1853, and these were still as she was a kid, probably around 13ish, and they're just kind of back and forth, just kind of about life, like, oh, this is what's going on here, this is what's going on here. And then later on in her life, we get to see her letters to Austin Dickinson, her brother. These were written from 1847 up until 1854, and these were written while she was at Holyoke Seminary. And these letters are kind of just like an overview of like what happened in her college. Like, ooh, this is happening with me. What's happening with you, brother? I really miss you. Like the typical things your little sister would send to you, the big brother, you know? And then, like, now that I've told you a lot about her letters to her family and friends, I'm going to move into her late life reclusion. So Mabel Loomis Todd kind of wrote about how she used to be this super social person who intermingled with everyone, but she kind of like started recluding from everyone, kind of isolating herself, and then eventually it turned into a full-on isolation where she just worked on her poems and stuff, and like her friends would come over and she wouldn't even talk to them when they came to her house. Like they traveled all the way there to see her and she wouldn't even come out to talk to them just because she was like so isolated into her room to just focus on her poetry and stuff. Throughout her life, she actually wrote 1,800 poems, and Christine Miller described the process of how her 11,000 of those poems she rewrote on little pieces of paper and like bound into 40 different booklets that she called fascicles. She also, in her writings, started writing on like little corners of envelopes from letters she had sent or received, and like these little poems are like super tiny and broken up, but some of them are still like super impactful and meaningful. Like there's this one from page 78 of Envelope Poems, and it says, "There are those who are shallow intentionally and only profound by accident." Like this kind of stuff is super meaningful and deep, yet it's just written on the corners of little envelopes and stuff. Like it was amazing. Now that I've kind of told you about her reclusion and kind of how she wrote all of her poems and stuff, I'm going to move into what happened after she passed away and how her poems were revealed to the world. So the Dickinson Museum talks about how Lavinia, her sister, was told to burn all of the letters and like kind of like a last will of Emily Dickinson. But there was nothing that said anything about like the huge collection of poems from the envelope poems all the way to the fascicles. Like there was no instructions on those at all whatsoever. So she's like, I really need to produce these. I need to get these out to the world because they're so amazing. So then she originally goes to Susan, who's the wife of Emily's brother, Austin. And going to Susan, she was really slow. Susan was really slow to start off, like, and producing and stuff, and she wasn't getting anything done. So then she turned to Mabel Loomis Todd, who was a family friend, to start producing all of them. And she did an excellent job of starting to produce them. Like I told you about that book earlier, full of her letters. The only issue, though, is that Mabel Loomis Todd was the mistress, the unknown mistress of Austin Dickinson. So Austin was cheating on Mabel, and Susan saw this as a complete betrayal of Lavinia, because Lavinia just went to Mabel and she's like, here, can you help me? And then Susan's just there like, holy cow, why would you go to him? So this caused like a huge divide in their family and feuds all over, and their daughters, like this feud carried into their daughters, and each of their daughters carried like different collections of her poems. So half of the poems from one daughter went to Amherst College, which is like the local college, and the other half went to Harvard College, which we all know and love. And so because of the divide, like her works are kind of split up and to different collections and stuff, and it's really hard to like get one solid complete collection of everything because there's so many like separate collections of different works, and they're held by competing colleges, so they're not going to just like give them to each other and make one huge collection, because that wouldn't do any good for either of the colleges. So now that I've told you about her life, I'm just going to start moving into the conclusion. And from this brief 5 to 6 minute overview of Emily Dickinson, I think I've been able to tell you about her letters to her friends, her letters and poems she wrote in reclusion, and how they were introduced to the world through Lavinia and all the drama. So perhaps next time you look up in a tree up high and see a little bird perched up there, you'll think of Hope, the thing with feathers.